Hello, friends. Thor wants to join us, it seems. Sorry, I'm a little late. And been cleaning shrimp, which is no fun. Totally yummy, but I still feel like I have shrimp goo all over me. Thor, stop. 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 How are you guys doing? Hi, Kimberly. Hi, William. William, we missed you today. Stop. All right. I wish you could see Thor. He keeps banging my arm and banging my arm and banging my arm because he wants to get on here. Oh, you're sick. That's no fun. Will you be with us tomorrow, William? Or are you going to be out again tomorrow? Me was sick is terrible grammar, by the way. You know that kills me. Gonna wait a couple minutes. A lot of people at school that have been out sick. It's a lot quieter tonight. We don't have all the kids, just the furry ones and the big one. All right, I'm going to get started because I think Mr. Rader is going to need me to help him with dinner here in a minute before I too awful long. So we're going to pick up off of the book No Talking by Andrew Clements. And we're going to start with chapter 13. Thor, stop it. He keeps doing this to my elbow. Just nudging my head. Chapter 13, Language Lab. As his last class of the day came into Mr. Burton's room, he didn't speak, and of course, neither did the students. The bell rang, and all the kids watched him as he put a stack of lined paper on the front desk of each row. Then he turned to the chalkboard and began to write. Today, there will be writing only. Nothing will be turned in, but everyone must write all period long, and everyone must communicate with at least 4 other people. You may not stop writing for more than 15 seconds. As soon as you have paper, begin. Stop. In less than 1 minute, every kid had a paper, and in less than 2 minutes, the first notes were changing hands. Todd wrote, I still think this no talking thing is stupid, and he passed the paper to Kyle. Kyle read the note and wrote, a challenge. And then Todd wrote, challenge? What challenge? Teachers already know about it. Like Mr. Burton. He's just messing with us. Thinks it's great we're not talking. I like talking. Kyle read, and he wrote back, too bad. Think how hard it is for all the blabby girls. We're going to win this contest. Beat the girls. Beat the girls. Beat the girls. Get it? It's a silent cheer, like at a basketball game. Cool, huh? Todd wrote back, cool? Dude, it's lame. Here's my silent cheer. Kyle's a dork. Kyle's a dork. Kyle's a dork. Kyle read the note, made a face at Todd, and then turned his back on him and started up a chat with Eric. No talking made it very simple to tune someone out. A few seats away, Emily was having a hot argument with Taryn. I did not say you couldn't come over after school. I just said, what's the point if we can't talk? That's all. Taryn wrote the note, shook her head, and wrote, I know you don't like me as much as you like Kelly, so stop pretending. Emily rolled her eyes and wrote, don't be like that. Taryn shrugged and wrote, like what? Emily used block letters for emphasis. Aw, Sniffy and Snoofy and Ouchie, I hate that. See, Taryn wrote, hate. That's what you said. You hate me. Emily scribbled, don't be an idiot. I don't hate you. Come over after school. Really. We'll think of something to do. But we're going to want to talk. I know we will, and we can't. Taryn wrote back, I'm not coming. You think I'm an idiot. Emily read that and then ripped the paper to pieces. And she reached across the aisle and patted Taryn on the arm and smiled her warmest smile, and then wrote on a fresh sheet of paper. Taryn smiled back and nodded. All around the room, kids were having to figure out the new way of communicating. And for the most of them, writing was a lot harder than talking. It was slower, like instant messaging, only less instant and less fun because there was no computer to mess with. There was so much less give and take than there was with talking. The unshushables weren't used to that at all. David just finished a frustrating set of back and forth messages with Bill. Bill couldn't understand Lucy. Bill couldn't understand how to keep from getting called offside during a soccer game. Dave had explained it 3 different ways. He had drawn pictures and diagrams and everything, and Bill still couldn't figure it out. So Dave passed a note to Ed because he was the best junior league player in town. Bill doesn't get the offside rule. Help! Ed read the note, nodded at Bill, bent over his paper, and began writing. Dave looked around for a new partner, and he saw that Lindsay was passing notes with Helena. They seemed to be having a great time, nodding a lot and cracking each other up. Probably gossiping, he thought, about something really stupid. He grabbed a clean sheet of paper and began a note to Lindsay. Well, Lucy wants to make sure you know she's here. Yes, we're going to have our ice cream party tomorrow. I got to go to the store and get ice cream. And you totally hear the dogs, and they're driving me nuts. I'm sorry. He grabbed a clean sheet of paper and began a note to Lindsay. What's the difference between you and a toxic waste dump?
Stop. Leave it alone.
Toxic waste dump. But he decided that riddle was too harsh, even for Lindsay, even if it was true. He crumpled the paper and took another sheet. But before he started writing, he got up, walked to a bookcase, and grabbed a dictionary. He flipped the pages, and then he ran his fingers down a column of words, and there it was. Interjection, used to express doubt or uncertainty or to fill a pause when hesitating in speaking. So Lindsay had been right about something for once. He sat down and wrote, Hey, Captain Barges, how's the war going? Ready to surrender? Dave nodded. Dave nudged Jason, handed him the note, and pointed at Lindsay. Jason nudged Lindsay and held the note out to her. And when she glared at him, Jason shook his head and pointed back at Dave. Lindsay made a face and then took the paper, holding it between her thumb and forefinger like it was a squashed toad. She read the message, wrote a little, and nudged Jason, who passed the paper back to Dave. Her reply is, It's General Burgess. Check the score, Dimbo. Girls roll, boys are losers. As usual, you're going to get totally schooled. Jason handed the paper back to Dave. He read her message, made a snarly face at her, and then wrote, Don't count on it, always the big talker. And sitting there, frowning at the paper, once again, Dave felt this overpowering wish that he could show Lindsay who was the boss, settle the question once and for all, really put her in her place. And in answer to this wish, an idea popped into his head, an idea he probably should have ignored. But he didn't. Pressing down hard with his pencil, Dave wrote, How about you and me go head to head, have our own special no-talking match? Starting right now, you and me, unless you're scared, and the winner gets to write a big L on the loser's forehead with permanent marker on the playground after lunch on Thursday. How's that sound? And he gave the paper to Jason. Listen, could you imagine somebody walking around with a big L on their head? I could. I would be the one that lost because, I can't stop talking. Lindsay grabbed the paper from Jason and read it, and there was no hesitation. She looked at Dave nodded a big yes, held up her hand with her fingers making an L, and pointed at him. Then she wrote something and handed the paper to Helena, who read everything, wrote something, and passed the paper back to Lindsay, who wrote something more and then passed the paper back to Jason, who passed it back to Dave. Lindsay had written, Helena, you be the witness, sign here, and Helena had written her name. And below Helena's signature, Lindsay had added, No backing out, fat mouth. Which color marker do you like best, red or black? Dave pointed at her and pretended to laugh and laugh. She stuck out her tongue and then turned away and picked up her chat with Helena. Dave felt like he lost that skirmish. Lindsay always had a way of firing the last cannonball. Then he smiled as he thought how much fun it would be to paint a big L on her forehead. If he could win, that is. Otherwise, Dave wouldn't have to put his feeling into those exact words. But he sat there in the quiet room, sort of wishing it didn't have to be a war. Because it was. Well, it was very interesting. Not talking was interesting all by itself, even without the extra fun of the contest. And the extra risk of his new private battle with Lindsay. And he suddenly wondered what Lindsay thought about the whole idea. and he wondered if she'd be honest enough to tell him.
Stop it.
Do you hear the dogs and they're fighting? So Dave grabbed a fresh sheet of paper and wrote, I'm kind of glad we're all doing this. The no talking thing. Like, I really didn't know was a word. It's pretty interesting. At least it is to me. Then he gave the paper to Jason. Jason tapped Lindsay's arm and handed her the new note. She read it and then gave Dave a short, suspicious look. And then she bent over the paper and wrote. Jason handed him the paper. And Dave read her a message. It said, It is to me too. I'm thinking and thinking and thinking. Pretty amazing. Dave turned and caught Lindsay's eye, and they half nodded at each other. For one tiny fraction of a second, it wasn't boys against girls, and it wasn't a battle. It was two smart kids enjoying the idea. Jason handed Dave another note from him this time. I'm not your personal delivery boy. Maybe you and Lindsay should sit at the same desk. Ha ha ha. Dave's face felt hot. He scribbled, You're crazy, onto Jason's note and jammed it back at him. And at the bottom of the page he and Lindsay had passed, he wrote, Yeah, but no way are you going to win this fight. You and your stupid friends are going down, big time. Whose mom was getting good grief? And as Dave tossed the note above Jason's head, I'm sorry, Lucy. And as Dave tossed the note above Jason's head so it landed on Lindsay's desk, he made an ugly face at her and then shook his hands like he was trying to flip something gross off his fingers. He didn't wait for Lindsay's reaction. Dave turned away and began writing a new note to Scott. All during 7th period, Mr. Burton sat at his desk watching. He wrote some notes too, but they were notes himself. No hesitation, everyone jumped in. Some frustration with writing. It's slow. Some anger displayed. A lot of nodding and gesturing, some hand signals. Tapping on desk and arms with shoulders to get attention. Some pokey too. Mouth sounds, tongue clicking, lip popping, raspberries. Some animal sounds, quacking, whistling, barking, sometimes to get attention, sometimes to bother. Not much boy-girl or girl-boy no-passing, but more than I'd expect from this group. A lot of smiling and frowning and other face-making. Not one single word out loud. Mr. Burton was taking a class at the State University 2 nights a week, studying for his master's degree. The course was called Human Development, and one of the topics they had studied was the way children learn to use language. Of course, this wasn't watching kids learn to use language. These students were already good with words, almost too good. No, this was watching children try to change how they express themselves, trying to use language in a new way. Which, if we want to take a side note, this is kind of like Instagram when you guys are texting back and forth, like I see you guys talking back and forth here. It's kind of the same, where you're talking and you're not talking on the phone, but you're texting or you're DMing or you're commenting on our video. Mr. Burton was pretty excited. It was like having his own private language lab. He thought, if I keep careful notes, I bet I can write my big research paper on this. I can do interviews with the kids once they start talking again, and I can gather information from the other teachers too. There's so much good stuff to work with. This is great. When the last bell rang, Mr. Burton was sorry the class had to end, and he couldn't wait for his first class on Wednesday morning. For the 5th graders, that last bell on Tuesday meant something else. It meant they had to go ride a bus and not talk. Could you imagine getting on the bus and not talking? I bet your bus drivers would love it. That meant they had to go to sports practice or to dance and music lessons and not talk. It meant they had to go home and deal with moms and dads and brothers and sisters and neighbors and everyone else and not talk. No one was sure all that was going to work, including Dave. But Dave was absolutely sure of one thing. Lucy, he was going to do everything. Stop. He was going to do everything just right. Because if he messed up, it meant he'd be walking around school on Thursday afternoon with a big L on his forehead. And that was not going to happen. Chapter 14. We might just read 14. I don't know if we'll read 15 tonight. It depends. Chapter 14. Seen, but not heard. The homebound school buses were quieter than usual on Tuesday afternoon, especially the ones hauling a large number of 5th grade students. But none of the 5th graders found the ride home very hard. With no grown-ups around, it was pretty easy to keep quiet. A few of them sat with friends and passed notes back and forth. Some read books or opened a notebook and did homework. Most of the 5th graders just sat quietly, looking and listening and thinking. For the fifth graders like Lindsay, who stayed for soccer or field hockey or cross country, after school was just like regular school because the coaches were all teachers and you could answer teachers because the 3-word rule. Everyone was getting pretty good at that part of the contest. Soccer practice was easy for Lindsay. Instead of yelling for the ball like she sometimes did, she just waved a hand or made a motion with her head. To direct teammates to cover an area or move downfield, she pointed. Lindsay was good at soccer. She did most of the communicating with her feet. For the kids like Dave, who went right home after school, not talking is more difficult. A lot more difficult. Because it's a fact of nature that parents don't like it when kids don't answer them. David? Dave had been home 5 minutes when he heard his mom come in the front door and call his name. He was upstairs in the bathroom. She called again. David, answer me. To be more specific, Dave was sitting on the toilet. Not nice to know. David, answer me. Dave knew that kind of tone of voice. He had to do something right away, so he reached over and banged on the inside of the bathroom door. It was the wrong move. His mom was up those front stairs and had both hands on that locked bathroom doorknob in 2 seconds. David, is that you? Are you all right? David, answer me. She was going to kick down the door. Dave was sure of it. He jiggled the doorknob, flushed the toilet, and was up and zipped and buttoned all in about 2 seconds. And he yanked the door open and gave his mom the best smile he could manage. Mrs. Packer was so relieved that she bent down and hugged Dave so hard that he couldn't have said a word even if he wanted to, which he didn't. But then she held him out in front of her and gave him a stern look. Didn't you hear me calling you? It would have been easy to shake his head no and tell a silent lie, but Dave smiled and shrugged and held out his hands. Then he pointed at his mouth. His mom frowned even more. Is your throat sore? Is that it? Dave shook his head. But it's hard to talk. Something hurts. Should I call Dr. O'Hara's office? Can we drive there right now? Dave shook his head again and motioned for his mom to follow him. He went to his room and then to his desk, and on a piece of paper he wrote, Sorry, it's a thing we're doing for school. Not talking for a couple days. That's all. Mom looked at the paper. Not talking? She said, Don't be silly. Everybody has to talk. Dave smiled and shrugged, and he wrote, Not all the time. His mom tilted her head back and made a face at him, nodding slowly. Oh, so you're saying that I talk all the time? Is that it? Again, Dave smiled and shrugged. Because I could be as quiet as anybody. Then she added, if I wanted to. Bending over to pick up a sweatshirt, she pushed it into his arms and said, Well, anyway, get the rest of these dirty clothes packed up and go downstairs and start a load in the washer. Only the dark colors, all right? Dave made a face, and she said, And don't give me any of that class. Kyle did a front snap kick without a yell. Mr. Hudson bowed and said, Kyle, son, always yell like this when you kick. Hi-ya! Now you. Kyle did the kick again, and he moved his face and mouth, but he didn't yell. Mr. Hudson's face got red, and he walked stiffly like he always did when he was displeased. But he was still being polite, because that is the karate way. He bowed. Kyle, son, did you not hear me? Ben Ellis walked onto the mat and bowed to Mr. Hudson. He was in 4th grade. When Mr. Hudson bowed back, Ben said, Hudson, son. The 5th grade kids aren't talking, none of them. Hudson's son bowed and made a wise face and tried to imagine what the teacher in the movie The Karate Kid would say in this situation. And after a long pause, he said, Ah, I see. Yes, silence it is. Then he bowed at Kyle's son, and Kyle's son bowed back. Then Kyle did another snap kick, without yelling. Ellen played the first flute piece for her teacher, but there was a problem. Mrs. Lennox said, All right, we're in 4/4 time here. She used her pencil and pointed at the quarter rest. How many beats of silence do you allow for this rest? Ellen tapped once on the music stand. Here's a picture. See it? I might have cut it short because my battery's high. Yes, we're reading no talking. That's true. Her teacher said, correct, but just won't say 1 beat. Then Mrs. Lennox pointed at the symbol for a whole rest. And how many beats for this one? Ellen tapped out 4 beats. Just say 4 beats, dear. Ellen smiled and tapped 4 times, and then pointed at her mouth and shook her head. What? Asked Mrs. Lennox. Again, Ellen pointed at her mouth and shook her head. Your lips? Something about your lips? Asked the teacher. Just tell me, dear. Ellen smiled and shook her head. Then she lifted the flute to her lips and played the piece again. And this time she read all the rest perfectly. Her teacher nodded, smiled, and then turned the page to the next piece. Before Ellen began to play, Mrs. Lennox pointed at each rest, and Ellen tapped out the right number of beats. The teacher nodded, and Ellen began to play. When she finished, Mrs. Lennox pointed at the start of the piece, picked up her own flute, nodded, and they played the whole piece again as a duet. Neither of them said a word for the rest of the lesson. All right, guys, my phone's going to die, so I've got to stop there. Plus, I got to go help Mr. Rader with dinner. I will reread this in a little bit and check out your comments. Hope you guys are enjoying the book. Yes, it is no talking. We'll pick up on Wednesday where we left off. And have a great night. Oh, watch Mrs. Rader try and figure out how to turn it off. Have a good night.